What is going on, guys? Welcome back to this installation of Across the Pond here on the Culture War channel. We have a great episode for you today. We've gotten, across the pond. We're going across to England, coming back to America. We went across the bigger pond, that is the Pacific Ocean. We've got an Australian total Chad, I would say. Auspill, you know him, you love him. If you don't know him, you're going to love him. So we're going to get in today's episode. He's been under a lot of fire recently from some various angles, so we wanted to bring him on to chat. We're going to discuss the political situation in Australia. I've taken a look under the hood at our analytics. There is a good contingent of Australian patriots watching the show, so I know they're going to love it. And probably here stateside, we're not keeping as close of an eye on Australia as we should be. So Auspill will bring us up to speed, and it's going to be a great show. Connor, how you doing, man?
Yeah, good, thank you. I first visited Australia a couple of months ago, and I went to CPAC, which is usually a bit tepid, and especially because Australia's only just reached the isn't immigration bad for housing part of the discourse. And, their supposed right-wing party at the last election was prostrating himself before Hindu temples. So I just decided to come along and say, demographics is destiny. You don't get Australia out of China or India or Pakistan, and you should denaturalize and deport Fatima Payman, who's like an Afghan senator who may have lied about dual citizenship and also celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk, and got a massive applause and standing ovation, which, was great for my fragile ego, but it means that the Australians are actually like hardcore patriots and nobody is representing that political opinion at the moment. And instead, if you do speak about that political opinion, apparently at Australia First rallies, you get kicked out. So, Auspill, care to fill us in on how you got booted out of that rally recently and why?
Yeah, well, no, thanks. First of all, for having me on. It's good to join you from across the very large pond. I made sure to have the Union Jack front and center just for you. So that Australia First rally and getting removed from it is certainly still making waves. No thanks to Avi Yemeni himself, the man who actually did kick me out. He calls himself a journalist from Rebel News, though I liken him more to an activist because on the weekend he certainly was one. So it was a political rally about, quote-unquote, putting Australia first. It had a list of demands, one of them being to supposedly end mass immigration. And speaking at the event was an Australian politician who is, probably one of the most right-leaning ones we sort of have. And that's saying a lot because, by American and even British standards now, she'd be basically a moderate or a centrist. So went there to see her speak and was barely there for about 10 minutes until this Avi Yemeni man with his whole entourage, including this Jewish activist group and his actual personal security, as well as this other activist group, all sort of swarmed me and were trying to kick me out on the charge that I was apparently a Nazi. And what really upset them was my jacket, which was from Helly Hansen.
So the Helly Hansen jacket, the HH, I thought that was Hulk Hogan. That's the way Hulk Hogan signed off his tweets. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, happy holidays.
I watched Avi's thing to get a fair shake of the other side, because otherwise, if I just watch the footage that you played on stream, it just looks like he's kicking you out of the rally and accusing you of being a Nazi, which, as far as I know, you're not. You're just in keeping with the white Australia policy that pretty much all Australians throughout history have agreed with. But as far as the HH thing, let's clear that up off the bat. Is it just the case that the what's the National Socialist Australian thing? Is it just that those guys have co-opted it and you were just wearing the jacket? Or was it a sincere dog whistle of your love for Adolf Hitler?
Well, it's like crazy because I remember I got interviewed immediately after the incident, and someone was they were quizzing me on this, and they said, "Oh, is that really a mistake? You wearing that?" And last night I was going through some of my older videos. I'm wearing it in like 2024. Videos on an older account I used to have was in 2023, and then of course you go way back when I was sailing when I was younger. I would wear it. If anything, like now there's this sudden pushback against wearing it, and people are saying, "Oh, you can't because of the insinuation." I'm kind of tempted to wear it even more and maybe pop out with a full Helly Hansen outfit, because they sell hats, shirts, jackets, shoes, pants, underwear. There's actually an option here. I could go with the full Helly Hansen. But yeah, it's really hysterical. And even if you could argue there's like this pattern that exists and it is like some sort of dog whistle, normies, for example, like which Avi's audience seems to be mostly made up of, they aren't really biting it. And even those who can sort of agree with it are just saying it's just so tortured of an argument to make. Like, to call someone a Nazi and then your only receipt being the jacket I'm wearing, it looks really insincere.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was looking at the article that Avi published, it was yesterday, and the headline was "Noticing the Noticers Exposing the Hitler Lovers in Disguise." And I'm sitting here reading this. Connor was saying at the top of the show is how far behind the zeitgeist Australia is. Because I was like, in the States, we moved past the calling everyone Hitler stage like 5 to 10 years ago. And seeing that like on full display, I'm like, is that really where the conservative movement in Australia is? Or is Avi just like totally a dinosaur in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, it kind of struck me by surprise as well, because I sort of thought the whole world had moved on from that. But yeah, Australia, they even here, the media would report that we're quote unquote bucking the trend of like, I guess like Anglosphere politics and where things are generally moving. And I guess it may be in part due to people like Avi who have this sort of authority or have had authority over the movement, continuing to like uphold the old rules, and like the old guard in Australia hasn't really been threatened. Like, we've had this political upheaval in Australia, and all that's been is like a shifting around of the votes to the parties which have existed for decades. Like, there's no real, I guess, change like we've seen across the world.
I was going to raise as well that obviously one of the grounds that he's going to accuse you of being a Nazi on is Jews and Israel. And I watched a clip from you where you had said on a stream that in the same way in the United States that there is an Israel lobby, and, you know, that they have a lot of international and ethnocentric influence over both the Republicans and Democrats, the merits of which can be debated. Australia's version of Israel is basically India. It's very similar to in Britain. Like, there is an Israel lobby in Britain, but there's also a very strong Indian lobby as well, and they're both as nefarious. I understand that Australians taken in like 250,000 Indians in the last few years in a population of something like 30 million people. So that's a massive population increase from one area of the world. So two questions on that. Is India basically the Israel lobby for Australia? And on the back of that, why is it that, you know, Avi, I believe he served in the IDF, right? Why is it that Israel basically gets to enjoy to be an ethno-state for the Jewish people, and they defend those interests? Hey, you know, in the abstract, I'm fine with that, just like I am for the Japanese, and I would like that standard too. But why doesn't Australia also get that standard, and the people that are pushing for that standard get called Nazis?
Yeah, I mean, on the question of like the Indian population in Australia, it's recently ticked over about 1 million, and 97% of them, according to the census, were born in India. And in the last 10 years, their population has more than doubled. So it's like very, very rapidly increasing. And part of the reason I say like India is our Israel is because in terms of like coercion and control, India is right up there. For example, in just the last few years, they had spies get deported from Australia. They were found by our intelligence service, and then they were removed. And it was publicly announced, which is unusual for our intelligence service to do. But then there was no condemnation from any sitting member of our parliament. Like, no one wanted to touch it. Even those who should have, just simply reaffirmed our relationship with India. And there's many more examples I can give, but basically the image I'm trying to paint is that we've even had guys critique the Israel lobby in our government in the past, like Bob Carr. We've had, even in the public sphere, a wealth of criticism of them, but what has basically avoided all criticism to this point, I would say, has been the India lobby. Like, we have public institutions which criticize our, you know, even our relationship with Israel and all these sort of things, and the public discourse is there, but it isn't for India. And it reminds me what it was like for America basically up until the 2020, where Israel had skirted all public criticism, even private criticism, and many people wouldn't touch it at all. And that's how it feels right now. So I guess it's more in terms of like how pernicious their relationship is, in the sense that no one feels comfortable critiquing it for some reason. And that's what I said on that same stream has been a large reason why I focused on Australia's relationship with India, because, you know, sending spies here, influencing migration deals to have this huge influx, which we're having, which is like unprecedented. I mean, they are now a bigger diaspora than the British are in Australia in terms of, the recently arrived British.
Yeah.
Yeah, over 1 million. Huge problem. And so that's where I draw that parallel from. And on like the Israel as like an ethno-state question, I remember I was saying on that same stream, I'm surprised that Avi would come after me so hard, because I can't really think of if I'd really made anything to do with Israel or like Jews, for example, on any of my platforms. Simply as a point of like all my bandwidth was dedicated to like the Aboriginal question in India and some other topics. I didn't really have room, and I felt like satisfied with just how it was going publicly that I personally didn't need to touch on it. So I'm thinking to myself now, of all the political commentators in the world who have now turned to being skeptical of America or Australia's relationship with Israel, he really found the one guy who maybe been holding off for like tactical reasons, and he's just like flipped that stone. I mean, it was just hysterical.
Yeah, well, I mean, I noticed in the video where you were being ejected from the rally, the guy that was confronting you, he said, quote, "We don't want Australian nationalists here." And that seemed to be like a kind of mask off moment where they actually probably didn't even think that you were a Nazi, but they were just looking for a pretense to get anybody that would actually challenge the notion that was widely accepted at that rally. And they like I said, they're fishing for a reason to eject you. And that's kind of the same thing. Me and Connor have talked at length about, and the conservative movements really all across the Anglosphere, probably the West broadly, is there's this propensity for people that are older to assume that they're just like 3 years away from like a massive political victory, and you just got to continue to let them reform the system, where young people are saying, no, the system is fundamentally broken, we need to overhaul it. And that strikes a lot of fear into these people that have sort of built this apparatus of being sort of the opposition, like being the people that slow down the left, rather than young people who are saying, no, we want to provide a new vision. We want to now overhaul the system as it stands. Was that the sense you got from the rally? And then maybe if you have any thoughts on sort of young people's relationship with the right wing in Australia as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to get into the rally stuff because there's so much like internal, like domestic Australian politics to do with these rallies, because there was like the March for Australia. This one was the Put Australia First rally. There's all these different various marches and rallies that have like different philosophies on what groups are allowed to speak, and therefore like what demographics attend. Like I would say the March for Australia, which had like an open philosophy of any group that wants an immediate end to mass immigration can speak. That then attracted very radical groups, a big contingent of the youth. Whereas this Put Australia First rally that I was ejected from, I think I was the youngest person there by like 20 years. Maybe apart from the daughter of like some political candidate, like that was how it was going. And so that then would give me my answer to you, is that the youth in Australia, especially men, similar to the global trends, are trending to the right and are looking for options beyond just the milquetoast offerings we've had for 20-30 years, and they're seeking something not only exciting but actually promising like actual renewal and not just managing the decline as we've had. But it's interesting because in Australia we don't have really a party like that at all, and so a lot of the academics in Australia will poll based on like party preference. And they use that to then say, oh, look, young men are trending, mildly conservative or like mildly right wing or sometimes even left wing, just because the party offerings are so bad that, many might just vote on like economic question of, oh, this party's going to give me the most student debt discount or whatever it is. But then when you poll based on like values, that's when you see similar or in line with global trends, a rightward shift that's significant.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the sort of lay of the political land in Australia, because I got the sense when I went over there and spoke to the politicians that they don't have an appetite for revolutionary change. So I recently did an interview with John Anderson, obviously your former deputy PM, and he was actually pretty amenable to me explaining why young men are so disillusioned with the old sort of like civic nationalist, cultural values, assimilation settlement, why young men and women are being driven apart on the grounds of social progressivism. But when I spoke to other Australian politicians when I was at CPAC, they recoiled in fear from President Trump, not necessarily because of his policies, but mainly because they thought he was impolite or boorish or didn't show the procedure and institutions which have ruined America and the parallels that have ruined our respective countries enough respect. And the only person that I'm seeing that has thrown a sort of rhetorical hand grenade at that in a sort of true Brogan fashion was, I assume, the woman that you're referencing at the rally was Pauline Hanson. She did this stunt in the last week, showing up at the the Australian Senate in a full niqab and got condemned for it. Other than Hanson and those sort of offensive theatrics, we appreciate what she's done to shove the Overton window, of course. Is there anyone on the Australian right on the political scene that's a promising offering, or are you just like bereft of champions right now?
Yeah, there's certainly I guess like some movement in the background. Like there are people trying to do a Reform Australia type get up. I mean, there'll be more information incoming on that. It doesn't look super positive at the moment, like who's funding that and who's rallying behind that, but at least that might enhance like the discussion. I think having two like parties which are trying to be dissent into the system, like One Nation, having a competitor like Reform will only be good for the discourse, I would say. But and then you got, if you want to go even further than that, there's like the White Australia Party, which will be cause a tremendous amount of chaos. I'm sure you'll both hear across the various ponds when that comes out. But yeah, at this moment now, the offerings, I think One Nation can be a lot of hot air. Like they've already dropped, one of their senators has dropped re-immigration in a few of his speeches now, so that's interesting, that's new. But at the same time, it's like that's what the Department of State is posting on X. Like it's kind of like well, what's the next thing now? Like now we're barely catching up, and you're meant to be the fringe of the discourse in Australia, and you're just a few years late to that party. But yeah, I think the appetite is there, and with Reform, with White Australia, with whatever else might form, just based on the winds changing, we could catalyze pretty quickly towards the UK or American. Like we could catch up pretty quickly, but at the very moment, you have all this putting their tie up Liberal Party guys who think Trump is a bit rude. He swore on Truth Social. That's sort of old guard, very, very old guard, which is stiff upper lip, British type, which, I mean, had its place in politics, but now with the change that we need, the pace we need, you are going to need figures, populism, right? Like Farage, Trump, and there does seem to be, unfortunately, where all the money lies in capital and strategy and interest in like the Liberal Party, Labor Party, the old institutions, a hostility towards that. And I guess, really it's going to have to be from like the people. I mean, that's populism, right? From the people to enact that change. And that's sort of, that's sort of up to people like me, I guess, is to be the commentariat in Australia and equip them and make them ready for that change. And the wind will change and the parliament will change and we might catch up.
Who was the senator that got dropped for immigration comments from One Nation? Because I know the Liberal Party kicked out Jacinta Price for observing that Indians vote 80% for Labour, and that's why they want to import more Indians. Who else got persecuted?
So she got dropped for saying that she didn't get fully removed from the party. She got taken to the backbench. Who was which is still significant, of course. There was recently a Liberal Party guy, Andrew Hastie. He's positioning himself maybe as that populist figure. I'm trying to think. This is bad. He caught me off guard here. I want to chalk it up to being too early. My mind's not fully fired up. But there's definitely been some politicians breaking rank. I think that Reform Australia Party, if it continues building, I think they want to have someone like Tony Abbott lead it. And Tony Abbott was a former PM of Australia. I don't think he gets got the full Farage energy, but I don't know. I think that like a lot of people adopting anti-immigration sentiments now in Australian Parliament are doing so just because the polling is so overwhelming. The polling has been obviously heavily against immigration since it begun, but with the March for Australia, with like public demonstrations, I think it's made it a little bit more real and showed that like, okay, people, if they're going to go hit the streets over it, politicians are saying, oh, sweet, maybe they'll donate to me over it as well. So we're seeing it, the positions of some politicians change as a result of that. But again, their parties and their institutions are punishing them for it. And so a lot of them back down as well after the fact. So it's going to really take someone with some guts from, say, for example, the Liberal Party, like Jacinta, to go hard and be unafraid of like that internal cancellation.
Yeah, I mean, because I was going to ask, what is sort of the understanding of the mass migration problem among the right in Australia? Because, I mean, stateside, we've seen some polling that indicates that a majority of Americans are in favor of Trump's ban of third world migration, which is like dramatic. I mean, we have net negative migration in the United States right now, which I make the point all the time. Like 5 years ago, just suggesting that be the policy would get you tossed from a conservative panel. And now it is policy in the United States. But in Australia, what is the understanding among the right of immigration? Are they fully there yet? Do they fully understand that, like, hey, the demographic makeup of the country is a valid concern to have? Or are they still kind of caught up on some of the older, immigration talking points that have proliferated in the States like 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like the polling for anti-immigration sentiments, like has shown the majority of the population wants like an immediate end, and it has wanted that for a long time. But I would say it was a fault of the political guard I was speaking of, like the Liberal Party and the old guard, anti-radical, for populist, all these sets of people who then set the terms of debate only in economics, and that really stifles any energy or further appetite for change, because when someone walks out into the street and they're now suddenly a minority in their country in like just 10 years time, the economic argument, that's not really what they're looking for. And so I think the biggest thing that happened in Australia recently that maybe has really brought a lot of politicians out of hiding in regards to the question has been the fact that, for example, the March for Australia not only had the economic argument against mass immigration, but for what really seemed like one of the first times in like recent memory of just a mass movement making the question of demographics. And that really supercharged it. And that's personally what I attribute it to, because we could have had the protest the same size on, again, this wasn't the one I got kicked out of, this was months prior. Like, we could have had a protest that size and spoken about economics. I don't think it would have had half the impact or half the cataclysmic effect that it had we not have just spoken about demographics as openly as we did. And we didn't do that to the detriment of any argument. We just had such a range of speakers and messaging that would allow for, yeah, sure, the economic argument and like labour and housing, etc. But also, hey, there's an actual demographic question, because, similar to America, it's only a few short decades until the people who built this country will become a minority. And for most people, that actually is a concern. And it's a concern that's going to vitalize them a lot more than the economic question. And it worked, because, again, you had politicians who were coming from parties ruled by that old guard who then felt empowered because of how many people went to the street over the demographic question to themselves sort of acknowledge it, or themselves become further emboldened on even, I guess, unfortunately, the economic question. But that's only because now the economic question or criticism of immigration pales in comparison to the demographic, and so many feel now comfortable making it.
But that's the thing. I mean, that's the framing that needs to be controlled, because the thing was, in the United States, in Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, the economy was firing on all cylinders for a while the mass migration was sort of coming in, and it was beginning to undercut. But people, they're going to attribute economic downturns to a whole variety of factors. That's why the framing is so important for white people that are on the right and just across the political spectrum to feel like, hey, the cultural composition of my country, the demographic composition of my country is valid. I'm allowed to advocate for, the people that ultimately make up the core of the country, that built the country. And that framing is so important. So it's like, I totally see what you're saying is like, I mean, yeah, you can use economic arguments and whatever, but it can't be lost upon, because you're not going to make any real progress towards an overhaul of the system unless you prioritize Australians, unless you prioritize Americans, unless you prioritize the British. I mean, Connor, you've probably seen the same thing, Connor. It seems like the conversation in the UK around immigrations is also starting to change now, where people are abandoning, maybe not abandoning, but they're saying, yes, there is economic implications, there's a supply issue, but England remaining English is also like probably the most important aspect that immigration is sort of undercutting.
Yeah, Piers Morgan hasn't updated his software on that yet. He's still saying that it matters more to him that he can get a curry than protect children from rape by Pakistanis. But the rest of us have eyes and can see. And the most interesting development in the last week or so, and I'm going to be streaming about this on my channel in the next week, is the question of representation, because we have 35 MPs who I think were born overseas in the UK, and then that doesn't even break down from demographics. We've got loads of Pakistani MPs, Indians, Bangladeshis. There was a scene the other day where the Pakistani Muslim Home Secretary was arguing with a Bangladeshi Muslim MP from her party and an independent Indian Muslim MP over whether or not it was racist that she was trying to stop illegal migration and return people to their countries of origin. Basically, bickering from the sons and daughters of the subcontinent about how they can import more of their co-ethnics. And at no point was the British public present. So there's been tweets by Lucy White, who's a friend of mine and now me, that have caused like a national scandal with MPs weighing in and condemning the both of us, where we said there shouldn't actually be not just a single MP who was born outside of Britain in Parliament, but not a single MP who has no native British ancestry whatsoever. Like, at least having one parent who is native to the British Isles is a prerequisite for serving the people, and that safeguards against you having ethnic interests and foreign loyalties that lie elsewhere that can then shape immigration policy or foreign policy. I mean, the worst example of this, Home Secretary Priti Patel, who oversaw the Boris wave, was describing her fellow Indians in Britain as living bridges. That's Modi's term for how Indian diasporas can use their demographics as a democratic advantage to then pressure the governments to make more favourable economic, international trade and immigration policies for India. I can see Auspill nodding his head. We're suffering from the same problem here, buddy. So I have been condemned by a sitting MP. They're now launched a regulatory, media broadcast regulator investigation into GB News for hosting me when I said that. And then Lucy's been banned from all those outlets. But nobody at any point in this has made the affirmative case for why Britain should be ruled by foreigners. Why should I have Pakistanis in my parliament? Give me the positive reason for that, because they're only being elected by the Pakistanis, or they're being installed in safe constituencies, like Rishi Sunak was, in like a 99% white British constituency, by the party who have DEI shortlisted them. And that happened on the Conservatives, by the way. So we are actually moving the ball down the field on this argument, because the general public, who doesn't care about being called racist by the BBC and just cares more about the demographic and cultural and economic disfigurement of their country, go, yeah, I shouldn't actually be ruled by foreigners. That's a perfectly reasonable demand. And if you're going to call that racist, then what other all sorts of absurd things are you going to say are beyond the pale as well? So them overextending and like playing their hand and trying to render reasonable arguments beyond the pale is repudiating them in real time. And I think the same thing is going to happen, not just in the States with this overreaction to Trump talking about Somalians, like the least desirable immigrant group imaginable. Like 99% of Somalians in Britain are either in social housing or in prison. We're paying to bat reform Somalians. Please give me the affirmative case why. But also, I think it's going to catch up to Australia too.
No, it was so interesting what you were saying about that. The Home Secretary, I believe, like referring to Indians as like the living bridges, because in Australia we had a guy who was the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade make a report, basically through the Department of Foreign Affairs to the government in regards to like how to get the most out of our relationship with India, and in that report, Varghese said effectively the only way to increase bilateral relations with India is to not only increase the size of their diaspora, but also like the prestige of them. Like they have to be in peak industry bodies, they have to get into the government, they have to just basically everywhere there is a corridor of power. He was saying, look, if you want a better relationship with India, we need to put them so-and-so. And obviously India has been applying a lot of pressure in Australia, like they were in the UK. I remember Kemi Badenoch, when she was a trade minister, was saying how difficult it was working with India because they were so persistent, so unrelenting on migration. Like you'd be doing some silk deal or something, and they'd be trying to put migration amendments in there. Like that is partly because it's a lifeblood economically for their nation. Like remittances are so important, but also the BJP, the ruling party of India, like a sense of like a far right party in India, ruled by Modi, they've had general secretaries of that party say the Jewish diaspora in the United States is the model. that is the model, because how effective it's been, I think everyone can agree for Israel, it's been highly effective. India's like, well, we want that. And they're saying it openly, and I think they're doing it openly. So back to that DFAT report, it was saying we have to increase the size of this diaspora, the prestige of them. Anyways, Varghese finishes his position at DFAT, and he transitions into being a chancellor, I believe, of the University of Queensland. And like in one of his speeches there, he says, I was born in, I believe he was born in Kenya, and he's like, I was born in Kenya, blah, 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 but India is the birthplace of my parents. And so it's sat there blurred in my upbringing, and I have this like love for India. And I remember reading that because it's not really prominently advertised that he's of like Indian heritage, because I think the Kenya is really emphasized. But it's like kind of wild that this guy was born in Kenya, then grew up in Australia, and then he's talking about India in his speeches at his non-government role. It's pretty wild to me. Now, I have alluded to in the past, I'm like, well, I feel like if it was maybe like a Anglo-descended Australian, would they have really made the same suggestions to the Australian government, saying we have to bring in more Indians and put them into our government? Basically, we have to become India to have a better relationship with India. I think most like Aussies would be like, that's too parasitical of a relationship. Like what an agreement that is. Like, let's just become India so we can have a better relationship with them. Whereas for him, that was like a totally normal calculation to make. I remember reading that report, and I just could not believe that was tabled in Parliament and accepted, and therefore many recommendations moved on. But there's so many parallels, and I think that report even said people-to-people links, which again is, like you were saying with the bridges or living bridges, is a term from India. Like that is a term that Modi and his BJP party will use, people-to-people links, living bridges. And then it's reflected in our politics. It's absurd.
Everyone's a blood and soil nationalist for the place they actually like, it turns out.
Yeah, literally. I mean, stateside, obviously, you guys will know this well. It did the rounds on Twitter when it happened last Christmas. The Christmas crash out from Vivek Ramaswamy here in the States, where he literally got up. And it's one thing for someone to come here from India and advocate for India on blood and soil grounds. That's one thing, which is bad. But it's another thing when they lecture the native population in the United States, where he was literally getting up and he was like, hey, the fact that Americans have like sleepovers and we're like play football, that's actually negative. You guys should be sitting around doing homework all day and like practicing for the spelling bee. And he was like totally using it as like I'm like, you just showed up here and your country sucks. That's why you came here. And then now you've come here and you're like saying that we don't have it all figured out. I'm like, hey, can you go look up on the moon and you can tell me whose flag that is up there? Yeah, well, I don't think we need any advice. I think we'll take the sleepovers and we'll knock out the homework maybe a little later. We'll do it in homeroom maybe. I don't know.
He just wanted a massive ISAT boost, and it was denied, I think. I think the entire state of Ohio is about to deny him his ISAT by making sure he loses like a R+10 district to your average Dem who is like flanking right on American culture of him. He had the audacity. Everyone thought it was AI to say that like kids should spend longer in school so the parents can spend longer in work. It's like it's literally turning America into like a spreadsheet filling out. It was real. Yeah, no, it was real. Like his team knew it was that bad that they pulled it, and then apparently they like circulated the rumor it was AI, which then people bought because they thought it was that bad. I even thought, the first time I've been fooled by AI, fools on me. Turns out it wasn't like one of those Black History photos that all of Black Twitter fall for. It was actually that bad that it was real. So.
Yeah, dude, we're having stateside the same problem that I thought we put it away. I thought Trump had finally destroyed this philosophy, is like, we just run candidates that are of a minority group because we're convinced that if we can win 2% of like the black vote, then we can flip, but now it's worse. We have these safe states like Florida and Ohio, which are like they voted for Trump by like dictatorial numbers. And we're running effectively DEI candidates because I don't know, we're trying to signal to a group that's not even in power anymore that like we're not racist. It's just like, I thought we put this to bed already, and now it's being relitigated all over again right in front of my very eyes, because we're going to lose Ohio, and there's a decent chance we lose Florida with Byron Donalds running. These are two states that Trump not only put back in the Republican camp, but like overwhelmingly put back in the Republican camp, and we're undoing it. And the motivations are varied, but from the state Republican parties, there's still this persistent anti-white hatred, and oftentimes it's self-hatred that proliferates, and it's going to cost us at the ballot box. It's going to cost us electorally, and it's going to make it much more difficult for the Trump administration to conduct, to enact policy when they're losing vital state governors' houses. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that they can have like it's such unapologetic rhetoric on Europe becoming like majority non-white, and their key allies going down this demographic like suicide path, and then I don't know. There's no really. I mean, I haven't really seen anyone or Trump, for example, say about America, which you'd think would be more pertinent than strictly, the key allies and Europe and such, which is definitely a welcome development. Like here in Australia, them sort of pressuring us through their embassies and other diplomatic pathways, pressuring us to try and make reports on migrant crime, which I imagine will be difficult to do because of how Australia collects data. We sort of strip it of a lot of those, you might say, immutable characteristics, like it's race blind, it might be migration status blind. So welcome developments, sure, in where they've been pressuring Europe and Australia included, but on the home front, it's, as you were saying, it's just like anti-white GOP, but it's having like international policy is like explicitly pro-white politic. Like I don't really know where that's come from, that disconnect.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is like Trump seems to have changed this. He's always obviously always been a tastemaker in the Republican Party. But in like the last, I think it was really that National Guard shooting in D.C., he's gotten really bold with a lot of his language, and it's been fantastic. I was saying, I think he really just doesn't like Somalians, because like, fair play, who would? Somalians don't even like Somalians, and like the some of his best lines have been in the last like week or two, just specifically speaking about Somalians. So it does seem like Trump is maybe understanding the demographic issue, or if he has understood it, he's finally sort of speaking about it in very explicit terms, and that's really beneficial to the American people. But like you said, I mean, yeah, internationally, the State Department's been really aggressive. I mean, there was the note that circulated, it was about a week ago, from the Trump administration by the State Department saying like, yeah, all Anglosphere countries, why are you killing yourselves? We're trying to build a intel apparatus that includes you guys. And if you're going to like commit suicide, we might have to look elsewhere for allies. We don't want to have to do that. So instead, we're just going to kind of use our power to bend your politicians to our will. And like you said, welcome development. But let's get more explicit on the American side. I think Trump has been good on rhetoric wise, but the GOP as a whole, there's still so much rot in there that it's just going to take a while to truly churn.
I think the difference is I think the difference is that our guys are in the State Department, and like we know that actual patriots are in there. Like I've spoken to guys who like watch my show and they work for the US government now. It's absolutely crazy. I know there are guys that like watch this show that are working in there, and they know what time it is. They understand the framing. Whereas God bless Trump, like he's done a lot for America and he's done a lot for the Anglosphere, but every boomer has a ceiling on how base they can be, and Trump's shows his when he starts talking about the need to prop up historically black colleges. I mean, are we really believing that any college, let alone the historically black colleges, are citadels of support for MAGA, let alone the Republican Party, who have made overtures to them for ages and never won more than like 1 fair weather % of the black vote, and suddenly announced the brothers are breaking for us? So I think actually the guy in the admin who are under him, and I think Vance gets this as well, they understand that there are just certain peoples and cultures that are wholesale incompatible with America, but also the Christian Anglosphere. And they don't want that inflicted on any of the countries that they like to visit, that they consider to be friends and allies, not just in the like bilateral military agreement sense, but they have a kind of kinship and affinity for us. I've often said that a lot of the Americans that visit London, especially when they came over for ARC and had to endure like the Hindu obstacle course of Heathrow Airport, think that the motherland has fallen. And so they want to help us rescue it from our treacherous governments, and that's very welcome. But I agree that like the language of and answering the question of what is an American requires the recognition that Americans have basically undergone ethnogenesis and are a distinct ethnic group. And I think actually Senator Eric Schmidt's speech, and I know some of his team, and again, they're all guys, but that he articulated America as an ethnicity of Anglo-Protestants and Scotch-Irish that have a distinct frontier spirit, very similar to that of Australia as well, in that you had to board a ship, separate yourself from the family members, sever your ties to the previous land, and be willing to undergo hardship, seeking not just fortune, but also the establishment of a shining city on a hill, a Christian mission over there. It forges a type of character and a spirit as part of that ethnogenesis. It's not just that you're pale, it's that you have a distinct character, a distinct set of beliefs as well, and that's bound up with your ethnic identity. You can't separate the two. So in order to conserve America, you don't need to conserve the GDP or the Constitution or values or even just pick the ethnicities that might annoy you with Trump, Ilhan Omar, and Somalians. You need to be focused on conserving the people, the families, your loved ones. Otherwise, much like as Ben Franklin said about trading liberty for security, if you don't conserve the people, you don't get the GDP, the values, or the country either.
Yeah, I mean that's it's probably one of the fears I could detect when I was in the States last, on college campuses with Turning Point and whatnot, is that is all this rhetoric really the result of Trump shaking things up so much, and is similar to how we've had it in Australia, as I was describing, this sort of old guard? Do they persist in the GOP where, let's say, let's give a hypothetical. Obviously, Trump's term is over. Somehow Vance doesn't get the primary or whatever. Whoever comes next, are we going to get just what's his name, Brylan Holy Hand politics? Is this, is the infrastructure around Trump, it might not really be aligned with him anyway. It could just be tolerating him simply because the fact that he's been winning. The fear is that does everything just kind of vanish with him and all this rhetoric disappears. Obviously the most optimal thing for it to be would be to persist, but then actually be refined, and as we've been talking about here, become more potent and more relevant to do with the actual heritage Americans. No, the fear is that all of that is done away with and is just replaced with what you were saying is reflections of anti-white politics within the GOP, and that could become writ large, and you could have billions of dollars of grants towards the historically black colleges.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the battle within the commentary class actually is of some relevance for our future, because that is post-Trump. That's where the battleground is, deciding what is going to be the policy platform of the GOP going forward. I think Oron McIntyre articulates this very well as far as understanding who we are as a people, is he just looks at it as a scale. I mean, the closer you are to that Anglo-Protestant tradition, the closer you are to that heritage America, to that core American. And that scale, that battle that's happening in the commentary class is actually really relevant, because you're seeing guys like Oron under fire, being called, woke riot or whatever, because that's what's happening. There's a battle over the frame right now, because I think everyone's starting to understand, okay, yes, we still have 3 years of Trump and we can make a lot of headway, but when he's gone, when he's out of the way, all the knives are going to come back out. We're going to relitigate all of this over again. And so, again, that's why I reiterate. I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is this sort of conflict we're seeing in the conservative realm is of utmost importance. I mean, you got to start winning now. You got to start swinging the base over to your ideas, because, yeah, that 28 primary is going to be a knife fight, and you're already seeing the well get poisoned for a lot of ideas that Trump, knowingly or unknowingly, has brought along, as he's entered into the or introduced to the right-wing zeitgeist in the United States. And it's of utmost importance. That's what it is. I think that's the value of these sort of conversations, across the pond, is for heritage Americans to understand, hey, for these settler colonies or settler countries like Canada, like Australia, like New Zealand, they actually kind of are having the same debates. And the right wing there in Australia and Canada and New Zealand accepted the same propositional nation theory that the United States accepted, which was, actually, there's no such thing as an ethnic American. Anyone can be an American. The soil's magic, and as long as you pick up a pocketbook constitution, then you're an American. And that's just not serving us well. All it's resulting is slain National Guard members on the streets of our capital. And no, it's time to actually have a conversation of, look, if we're going to be denaturalizing people, that's a big step. And I do think that is a goal of the Trump administration. They're moving in that direction. That naturally begs the question, who is going to be denaturalized? Can we denaturalize a heritage American? Everyone says no. Everyone kind of instinctually knows what that is. Now it's time to intellectualize that idea. It's time to bring that idea and tighten ranks and actually deliver that to the conservative base. I mean, because the left's never going to go along with it, but the conservative base needs to understand, why do we need to denaturalize people? If we can determine who shouldn't be an American, that's going to be very helpful going forward because I would say it's probably up to 100 million people, in my opinion. But I don't know what you guys think.
It's relevant for across the pond because, I mean, I gave a speech when I was in the States on the topic of legal versus illegal immigration, and I sort of gave the warning to the American audience that, look, Australia has done the legal immigration thing, and it's possibly more pernicious in terms of like replacement and sliding into minority status than illegal, because it can be so acceptable on economic terms and various other terms, which most people will be happy with. Whereas illegal immigration is something that, as we've seen in the States, basically can be sunsetted because of popular will. I would say that America largely has overcome, at least under this administration, the problem to do with illegal immigration, as we were saying about earlier, net negative migration now. But you've seen shifts in the background, likes of Vivek, as we mentioned, or even Elon to a degree, and Trump himself liking the idea of H-1Bs. And Trump, when he says H-1B, I feel like they should make a new term, because I do feel like he's talking about extremely specialized positions, but is making the accent of wholesale defense of, what is a mass immigration tool. But the speech I was basically delivering was saying, look, you've gotten away with ending illegal immigration, but you're being placated now, and you're allowing for this rhetoric within the GOP to grow about H-1Bs. And so it's like critical to adhere the warning of the likes of Australia, where we've only basically ever had legal immigration, and now we're potentially demographically worse off than if we had illegal immigration, because we've had it all in similar, I guess you could say, like population growth. America had 12.5% in the last 25 years. I think Australia had 25%. Like, we've had a much higher population growth stemming from legal immigration, all the while, we're nowhere near ending legal immigration, as America is, just gotten done with ending illegal immigration. So the point is that, the GOP, yes, needs to advance the rhetoric. At least the base might need to be awakened by the commentariat to realize that you haven't ended one issue, and now it's like the golden age. You've ended one issue, and now there's like a nightmare situation just bubbling away in the background by the likes of like that tech class and Vivek and whatnot.
Connor, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate your time. If you want to find Auspill, where should they go to find your work, sir?
They can just go to www.auspill.com, auspill.com. Should have everything there.
Yeah, they can watch you flexing in the mirror in the gym and the Daily Mail, right?
Yeah. There we go.
Absolutely iconic image. Tate, thank you very much, as always. You can find me on X at Con_Tomlinson. You can find me on YouTube and Substack under Connor Tomlinson, and you can tune into Across the Pond every Saturday and Sunday now. And I believe we're going to start cross-posting on my channel too, so we can cross-pollinate our audiences as well as Across the Pond. And yet again, if you have any guest suggestions, drop them down below, because we do enjoy reading the comments. You Patriots are fantastic posters down there, so thank you for keeping us amused.
Yeah, we love it. Auspill, it's great to have you, dude. It's annoying getting mogged on our own show. Like, what's going on here? It's a total containment breach. But with that, you can find me on X and Instagram at Real Tate Brown. Like Connor said, we'll be back, and we'll be back next week with a whole new slate of content for you guys. And with that, thank you very much for watching.